Welcome to EWTN Live. I'm Father Mitch Pacwa. It's a program where we bring you guests from all around the world. But before we get to our guest, who will be Father William Watson, one of my Jesuit brothers, who works with the Sacred Story Institute, I want to mention that today is the feast of Saint Camillus de Lellis. He's one of those saints of the 16th century. Most people think of the 16th century and the Reformation and the need for dealing with corruption in the church. However, like a lot of other periods of time in the church where there were problems, a lot of saints rose up. And he's one of them, and especially in terms of taking care of the poor who were sick. He started an order of clerks regular, that who are ministers of the infirm. Their initials are MI. And this kind of care for the poor was not only an act of charity, but it began the process, I'm actually moved along a process of developing hospitals. That's very much an invention of the Catholic Church. And this was a call to alleviate pain. So while we see meaning in pain, we also have many people throughout the history of the church who serve the sick, especially the poor sick, to alleviate the pain as best we can. So we seek his intercessions. We have a lot of similar needs. Now also, before we get to our guest, I want to mention that today I'd like to give an EWTN update from our own EWTN Director of Program Acquisitions and Co-Productions. They're the folks who bring in productions from outside EWTN. And this is Mr. John Elson to tell us something about new programs that are coming up. John,
thank you, Father. It's good
what
to be
you
with
got for us
Thank
today?
you, Father. Well, about a year ago, we had a five-person team, our EWTN team, which joined producer Jeremy Rivera, and 20 other pilgrims who were led by a Father Nathan Cromley along the Portuguese route of the Camino de Santiago, or the Way of St. James, which it really is made up of 8 different routes that go across Spain and end in the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela, which is located in the northwest corner of Spain, where one can find the tomb of the Apostle St. James.
Right.
So thanks to our viewers for their spiritual support and obviously for their financial support, we were able to produce Discovering James, Saint of the Way, which is a 60-minute program which captures the pilgrimage experience of Father Nathan and these 20 pilgrims. And we combined that content with expert interviews with theologians, historians, and other experts to help us discover, the name of the show, and perhaps even rediscover, for many of us, the Apostle St. James, his role in salvation history, the fact that he and his brother John and Peter were privileged 4 different occasions to witness different things at Mount Tabor with Jesus. He called him into the Garden of Gethsemane. Healing of Jairus' daughter as well. So, and also
in Garden of Gethsemane.
And also the other purpose of the program is to reclaim the Catholic identity of the pilgrimage route, the Way of St. James, which is named in his honor. As we know, from the 9th century, pilgrims have been traveling across Europe on foot and on horseback, ultimately through Spain to reach the Cathedral of Santiago in Compostela. And the church authorities in Spain have told us that they're very concerned, although there's a large number of people doing this. Even just last year, 300,000 people made the Camino de Santiago. What's concerning and what needs to be reasserted is the Catholic identity, because many of these individuals are doing the Camino, walking the Camino, as tourists and not as pilgrims.
It's not a religious motivation. And there's a big difference between being a tourist who does something to get some photographs and say, yeah, and I was there, versus a pilgrim who's seeking the Lord and the holy place.
Absolutely. Right.
Can we take a quick look at a clip that we have ready?
Sure.
You know, it's sort of interesting that the tradition is the Camino, the way. because the apostles were certainly those who were on the way with Jesus. And this is what disciples did. They didn't just hear a lecture and then go home. They followed that teacher, they lived with that teacher, they saw how he embodied that teaching. Christianity isn't just about learning data. It's not just getting information about Jesus, it's learning Jesus.
When we talk about James, we often see him depicted as a pilgrim. And if you go to the Cathedral of Santiago, you'll see some beautiful sculptures that are part of this facade of the church that depict him in pilgrim garb.
And we are pilgrims as well. We are not home. We like to imagine that we've arrived. We don't want to imagine that we need to let go of the world and let go of all of its creature comforts. Keep our eyes focused on that true promised land that is above. That's what that image is meant to teach us. And like the disciples, we're on the way with Jesus, not to the earthly Jerusalem, but on this journey ultimately to the heavenly Jerusalem.
This is why James came. It was to found a church that would pilgrim journey its way all the way to heaven, keeping to the voice of the shepherd, watching the path of God's law, but united in a spirit of joy and fellowship that overcomes the trials and the hardships. Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. St. John, pray for us. St. James, pray for us. Our Lady of Fatima, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
All right, well, thank you, John.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. This is going to be Discovering James, Saint of the Way, with Father Nathan Cromley, CSJ. That'll be July 25th
That's right.
at 10 p.m. Eastern Time on EWTN. And you can go to EWTN.com for more of the air times and information about this.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you much, and
Thank
we'll
you.
be back in just a couple of minutes with our guest for tonight, Father William Watson, so please stay with us. Welcome back. Now we want to talk about another topic. All of us have seen various evangelization programs come and go over the years, and unfortunately many don't survive very long for a variety of reasons. But our guest tonight, has learned to build an Ignatian spirituality-based evangelization program that has been standing the test of time. And hearts that are influenced by secular society and their minds for almost 40 years now are responding to it. So here to tell us more about how you can help to carry your faith community forward with evangelization and spirituality, please welcome Father William Watson of the Society of Jesus.
Thank you
Good to have you.
Great to be
Good to
here.
have you, Father Bill. So, welcome back.
Thank
It's
you.
good to have you here. And just remind our folks exactly what is this institute that you founded and that you're heading up right now. What is it called and what do you do with it?
It's called Sacred Story Institute. It's built around the Ignatian examination of conscience.
Yes.
And I decided to call it Sacred Story Institute because I thought it was an easier sell than the Institute on the Ignatian examination of conscience.
Yeah. But why Sacred Story? Okay, that's easier. But how does Sacred Story connect to making an examination of conscience?
Because I think what happens in the 15 minutes of the Ignatian examination of conscience is someone, you or I, a lay person, anywhere in the world, is looking at his or her life story in light of God's grace and redemptive power. And I think it's easier for people to kind of feel the reality of their life when they see it as a story connected to the great story of the cosmos, which is Jesus Christ.
Right. And I think that's very much what Father Ignatius wanted us to do. And of course, for those of you who are connected with Jesuits in various ways, at the end of the month we'll be celebrating his feast days.
Exactly.
On the 31st. And this is a very important element of Jesuit spirituality. It's not only making the exercises as a retreat for 8 days or 30 days, depending on what you do, or weekend, but it's also this ongoing spiritual life that looks for God in all the circumstances of our lives, but we examine our conscience to find Him. How does somebody go about doing that?
Well, they have to learn how to do it. They have to learn to listen to their life as Ignatius did. Ignatius was awakened to the fact that he was a spiritual being at about the age of 30. He realized that there were two narratives or plot lines that he could give himself over to, a self-centered one or one that was holy. And he didn't realize that till he was 30 years old.
And he was a Catholic. He would fight for the faith.
Sure.
He would, do whatever he had to do.
That's right.
But not necessarily live all of God's commandments.
I would
picking and choosing of some of those. Now, wasn't he?
I wouldn't call him a model Christian at the time.
No.
Right.
No. And nor would he.
Right.
He's one of those saints that the closer they get to God, the more they realize how big a sinner they are. He called himself one of the biggest sinners.
That's right. And toward the end of his life, he said he didn't think there was anyone in the history of Christianity who had sinned as much as he had, who had been given as much grace. So I always tell people, if you want to be holy, you have to be willing not to feel holy.
Yep, that's right. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Now, what is it then that you do that in some way aids evangelization? How does this help with evangelization to teach people to examine their conscience in this Ignatian way? How's that part of mission?
Pope John Paul called for a new evangelization.
Right.
People today in parishes are looking for, everybody wants to have engaged missionary disciples. And there's only one way to get there. People have to confront the reality of their life as it is in its sinfulness and brokenness. They have to turn to God and realize that they can't save themselves and eventually end up accepting God's mercy. And it's those people who are transformed by the kind of the outpouring of God's love after having tried to save themselves and realizing that they can't, that become the ones who are the engines of evangelization in the history of the church and also in local faith communities. What our tools seek to do is to aid that process, like all of Ignatian spirituality, bring people in direct confrontation with the reality of their lives, help them to realize that they're not going to be able to save themselves, and then accept the mercy of Jesus. And I think we have been able to create very, very dynamic programs to that end for youth, for adults, and eventually for young adults.
But, you know, don't you worry a little bit about this? But, you know, because people shouldn't feel guilty about their sins, should they? I mean, this is something that they can become all tied up if they have these guilt feelings. Is that where you want them to go?
No, I want them, there's that old saying that guilt is the gift that keeps on giving. Guilt can actually be a form of self-salvation, because if you feel guilty, you're kind of punishing yourself.
Yes.
And therefore you feel like you've kind of earned your salvation. Guilt in the context of Ignatian spirituality or examination of conscience is being attuned to the reality of what your life is, and a holy sense of guilt or shame is something that turns your heart towards God. Mm-hmm. It's not something that shuts you down and makes you focus on yourself. It turns you to the Lord. Exactly. And Ignatius had to learn this because he was focused on himself. In his early conversion, he tried to save himself through perfect confession and reconfessing his sins, and it didn't work. And he finally had to say, I accept your mercy in my brokenness. And that's when all of his mystical graces came in.
He had problems with being scrupulous, and he had to learn that his scrupulosity, that this constant reconfessing, and did I do it right, and was I perfect, and all this, that was actually a form of pride.
Yes, and he said that late in his life.
Yes.
He realized that. So yeah. I think people need to know that scrupulosity is a form of pride. And I sometimes tell that to people in confession who are scrupulous, because it really catches them off guard, because they think they're kind of being super holy, when actually it's a form of self-salvation.
Right.
Yeah.
And
goes nowhere.
Exactly.
Right.
No, it's the focus on Christ.
Right.
And what he has done to save us. That's
right.
where St. Ignatius directs us.
That's right.
In the spiritual exercises.
And that's what he himself discovered, and he became so overwhelmed with God's mercy. You know, he was known as the pilgrim who was crazy for Jesus. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah.
Right.
Now, in terms of some of the concrete things that you ask people to do, what these programs, what is it that you are promoting?
I'm promoting the idea that if you take 15 minutes a day, slow down, learn to listen interiorly to what's happening in your life, mm-hmm. to learn to sort out, as Ignatius did, that there's two ultimate directions you can go, towards the light, towards God, or away from the light, away from God. Mm-hmm. And to learn to feel that in the context of your day-to-day, that they will be grow in freedom and happiness and the quality of discernment. So we have created programs for pre-K through 8th grade. For adults, we're creating multiple versions of our adult programs, and we'll eventually have young adult programs that help people take the risk of taking time apart, learning how to listen, and learning how to focus their hearts on God.
And it's something that busy people can do, because it is
exactly.
15 minutes.
That's right.
You know, it's not that long. We have a clip ready from that you all produced. Let's take a look at this called the 15-minute examine.
You could go here, go there, go nowhere. You can go about your day, go about your business. Go like mad, go with the flow, go against the grain. Go out, go beyond, go places, son. You go, girl. Go, dogs, go. You didn't just go there, oh no you didn't. Go to the mat, go the distance, go crazy. Go for the gold, go for it. It's going, gone. But for true happiness, true meaning in life, there's only one place to go. Go in, where God is waiting for you. Make life a sacred story in 15 minutes a day.
Nice. That's trying to call modern people to say, hey, you are going to die.
Right.
You're not going to escape that.
Right.
And so where are you going? You can pretend you're not. That's not wise. It's really dumb, in fact. But you don't only focus on it either, but where are you headed? And the examine is a way to figure out some of that and see where you are with your new relationship with God. And it is very interior.
Right. And we wanted something, this is one of 6 commercial spots that we will start rolling out at the end of 2018 and into 2019 when we start our major marketing. We've been around for 6 years, and we worked with a company out of San Francisco, and we wanted a product, if you will, a marketing product that could play in a secular environment, but had a spiritual message at the end. It's a way of kind of what I call marketing holiness in a secular culture. And it focuses all on the 15-minute Ignatian examination of conscience. We want to be able to help people realize that if they can take just a little bit of time every day, they're going to be a lot happier, a lot freer, and more focused on what's really going to bring them joy and produce fruit that endures to eternity, as I like to say. Right.
One of the temptations that people have is to follow impulses that are very immediate, oftentimes do not work out well because they're based on emotion or immediate desire, and then not reflect on what was it that made it not go so well, or if I followed something good, what was good about it. There's just running from experiment to experiment in life with no reflection on what are the results of the experiment?
Yeah, it's living reactively instead of reflectively.
Right.
And people do that for a reason, Father Mitch. They do it because they're afraid to slow down and be quiet and to listen to what's happening inside of them. I learned that when I was working at Georgetown with young adults. They were afraid of a silent retreat because they thought somehow God would ask them to do something that they didn't want to do, and that was going to be an awful thing. And so people would never let themselves get quiet. And so I removed the name silent from the program, didn't change the fact that it was silent. But
just didn't warn them ahead of time.
Didn't warn them ahead of time. Didn't want to scare people away.
That sounds Jesuitical.
Well, it's marketing. It's an effective marketing strategy.
I said.
Right. Jesuitical. Right. Yeah.
Yes, I was the son of a used car salesman. I understand marketing.
Okay. Pre-owned.
Pre-owned. In our neighborhood, they were used cars.
They were used cars, right.
You didn't fool our neighbors.
Right.
This as a part of evangelization, how exactly is this call to the examination of the conscience part of evangelizing people? Why do you see it in that light?
Because, like I said, what the examine does, Ignatius's method for the examination of conscience is unique in the history of the Church. And it basically follows the 5 movements of his awakening and his conversion process, which also is the structure for the Ignatian spiritual exercises. So I show this in my doctoral work, how his conversion process gives him the idea through graced insights, how this methodology works. And he's promoting that for the Jesuits in the early part of the Society's history. In fact, the Jesuits' success in their first 200 years only used 2 spiritual disciplines. Ignatius told the Jesuits to promote the Ignatian examination of conscience with the laity and frequent confession at a time when confession was feared in a time of kind of Jansenistic culture. So those were the 2 disciplines that brought the Jesuits their great success. And my goal with Sacred Story Institute is to replicate that success for the 3rd millennium.
Yes. Now, one of the areas that you are developing, we were talking about this before, is in terms of the addiction to pornography. Why is that so important for your mission here, and what is it that you're recommending?
Okay, when I started in 2012, Father Mitch, our main spiritual platform, if you will, for adults is called 40 Weeks, an Ignatian Path to Christ. So it's a very durable spiritual platform that a layperson can do on his or her own, or a parish community can adopt. But I always wanted to create special versions of it for people with special spiritual needs. So we just published a version for people in prison. We have one coming out for diocesan priests in September. We're working on one for people with addictions. We're working on one for people for wounded warriors. But the addiction one was something that I hadn't planned. I was a facilitator for the Seattle Archdiocese for their priest convocation days this year. The topic selected was pornography. I met a couple out of Green Bay, Wisconsin, Bruce and Jeannie Henneman, with Elizabeth Ministries, who have one of the biggest online spiritual programs in the world to help people get off of pornography addiction. I interviewed them for the convocation days and got very excited about their work because it reminded me of some of the doctoral work I did on Ignatius in terms of how he was getting out of his addictions when he was in his early conversion experience. And his first temptation on the road to Montserrat, after he had kind of purified himself, if you will, or God had purified him, he had this panic attack, this spiritual panic attack, thinking that he was going to have to live for 70 years without the pleasures of his first 30. And he is given the insight to speak to the temptation. He says, "You poor creature, can you promise me even 1 hour of life?" And then he says in the autobiography that his peace returned. The modern issues on brain science are confirming Ignatius's insight. And this is the work that Bruce and Jeannie Henneman do with their Reclaim Sexual Health program. It's an online program. And what it does is it trains people how to remap, if you will, the neural networks of the brain. And it's a conscious activity where you're paying attention to temptations. They say, face it, name it, and replace it. So they're basically doing what Ignatius did. And they say that when you do that, they have neurological evidence that it's creating new pathways which slow down the old pathways that were kind of addictive, reactive responses to childhood temptations and fears and anxieties, and opens people up to new things. So we want to work on them with 2 books. We're going to be talking later in September about a follow-on program for their Reclaim program for people with addictions. But Jeannie also told me that one of the deeper wound often is the spouse, who is the victim of her husband or his wife's addiction, because it's a self-image wound for them. So we want to work on 2 programs for them.
And so folks, see, I think understand that one of the things that goes on in pornographic addiction is that, fairly fake images, of what sexuality is like and what people are like in sexual situations is the focus, while the real concrete person who is being compared to these fake things in pornography. And that person feels, well, I can't be like these people who probably themselves are not like that either. That's where the magic of the media gives a false image rather than real life. But the person in real life says, I can never be like that. And that anxiety is very real for spouses.
Yeah, and I would explain it even more globally, that the effects of original sin were to turn people away from God and a healthy love of the other and towards themselves. And addiction of any kind focuses the person on themselves and makes them feel alone and lonely. I think the great insight of this Reclaim program, which is built on a program, neuroscientists and psychiatrists, it was actually funded originally by the Mormon Church, but it's all based on the latest in neuroscience. It shows people how the brain works, because usually an addictive habit starts at a very young age. And
we're talking 8 years old.
8 years old. It can
9
be
years
sometimes
old.
even in the womb in terms of anxieties if a mother is stressed when she's pregnant. So a child can get issues that make it difficult for them to cope. What the Hennemans point out and what the science points out is what the brain is trying to do is to remove the fear and the anxiety. So it releases dopamines and endorphins in the brain when the addictive habit is engaged, which calms the brain down and it feels like an escape. And the more that the person turns to that issue at the same trigger, if you will, the bigger the neural pathways become. But what they have shown is that you can reverse that process through a conscious attention to your life, which is like the examination of conscience.
And it's not merely saying, oh, I'm sorry, I don't ever want to do that again, and I'm really sorry to your wife and all that. It's another process. To scratch the old record and make new grooves.
And let people realize that they...
For those of us who are old enough to remember records.
Yeah, and to let people realize that they are not the addiction, that they are a child of God, a son or a daughter of God, and to focus on that. And it's a very, very powerful program. I'm very excited about working with them on this.
I want to just let people know that it's the Sacred Story Institute, and you can find out more about them by going to their website, which is sacredstory.net. Sacredstory.net. And we're going to take a break, come back, and want to get some questions from you as well as our studio audience, so please stay with us. Welcome back. We're with Father Bill Watson, and we're ready to take some questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready, Father Mitch.
Well, let's start off with this lady here. Ma'am, where are you from?
St. Ignatius Parish, Sacramento, California.
I like it better already.
I do too.
So what's your question, ma'am?
How are you going to ensure that our diverse Catholic population has access to the sacred story in terms of training, information, and being a part of this process? And I'm talking about African Americans, West Indians, young people that are separated from the church.
Okay, great. All right. So
I'll answer very briefly. When we created our 40-week program, we had people in 6 different parishes in Seattle from all socioeconomic, all racial backgrounds, all different levels of education. And so the program that we created was a very, very, it was very collaborative, used a lot of different people, and we were getting feedback every week from them. And so the text that was created has this feedback from all these different people. And our programs are in Kindle, book, they're accessible all over the world. So many people were engaged in them. Our DVD series had people from all different socioeconomic, cultural backgrounds. So
do you have it in Spanish and other languages?
All of our adult programs are in Spanish.
Okay, good, good. That's important to get, you know, the different languages and probably, you know, a few more languages.
Our book for prisoners will be in Spanish in September too. So,
oh, great, great, great. And matter of fact, I need to talk to you about that because
very good.
In 10 days we'll be having the Colby Ministry meeting in Texas for the people who do the prison ministry in Texas.
Excellent.
And I've been working with them for some years now.
Perfect.
And, this would be great for them to know about. Ma'am, where are you from?
I'm from what we call Central New Jersey.
Does everybody else call it that?
Well, folks around Princeton do.
Okay, well, we'll go with it then. What is your question?
I'd like to know how the sacred story would connect in terms of the new evangelization, and especially about helping folks who have left the church come back.
Good question.
Yeah, excellent.
Pope John Paul is the one who coined the phrase the new evangelization. And when he finally codified it in Redemptoris Missio, he said there are 3 types of evangelization the church does. It reaches out to the ad gentes, to the people who've never heard the gospel. It reaches in to the people who are the ones who proclaim the news, the laity and the engaged priests. But he says we need a new evangelization for the many people who were raised in the faith but have left.
Yes.
So that's been my focus for 25 years, and the programs that we do, we are bringing people back into the church, people getting a copy of our book from a person who gave it to them. So we're very excited about the type of response we're getting with our adult 40-week program.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, this is a very fruitful area. I think a lot of times, especially as young adults begin to move through a rational kind of question that's due to their own maturity. You know, they want to have their faith integrated rationally, but they're in circumstances at colleges and elsewhere where the faith is attacked. They assume the attacks are truthful, even when they're not. And so that, you know, this is something where we have to sort of help them to work their way back, not only to the rational thoughts, but also coming to know Christ.
And the
be
cultural
known by Him.
fragmentation, Father Mitch, is so profound in terms of divorce, and we have the highest number of young adults disengaged in probably, at least in modern history. But I think that's a very hopeful sign, because they're realizing that what they're doing is not making them happy. They're very empty, and I think they're ready for something.
And with the breakdown of family around the country, their parents are disengaged with them.
That's right.
How are they supposed to be engaged with the church, with God? They don't see engagement of the people that brought them into the world.
Exactly.
And this is highly problematic. Young man, where are you from?
My parents were originally from Poland, but now we live in Illinois.
You live in Illinois, so you're not from Poland.
Yeah.
So you can still run for president. Okay. But your dad can't. So what is your question?
My question is, did anybody live when Adam and Eve lived in Garden Eden?
So did anybody else besides they?
Live in a different place or such.
In a different place.
Father Mitch, I'm going to do something that Jesuits don't do very often. I'm going to say I don't know.
I'm going to do what Jesuits usually do. I don't know if you were aware. Have you ever heard of Neanderthal man? Nope. Okay. One of the things you should go and look up. Do you ever study anything about dinosaurs?
Yeah, sometimes.
Okay, well, they're not as old as dinosaurs. I may be, but these Neanderthals are not. And Neanderthal is not the ancestor of human beings. It's a different species. They don't exist anymore. But they were older than Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens is our species. They were called Neanderthals. And they did live all over, especially in Europe. In fact, in Poland and Ukraine, and in some parts of Western Europe too. But because they didn't travel around as much as Homo sapiens, they kind of became extinct about 35,000 BC because of a huge volcanic explosion, pretty much wiped out their population. So they were around. Okay?
But they would have responded to 40 weeks had they been around.
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, they were pretty intelligent.
Right.
They even knew how to make musical instruments. They had language and lots and culture. They developed housing and all sorts of things.
Excellent.
And religion.
And
They were religious. They had religion, but they say what, about 5% of our DNA comes from them.
That's right, 4 to 5%.
Yeah. Wait a minute, you have the same kind of uniform. Was there a factory out there? Where are you kids from? Are you with him? Or is he with you?
I don't know.
You don't know. Are you at all related to him?
Okay, I am related to him. I am his brother.
Okay,
But my
probably. Listen, this sounds like a lawyer. So what's your question? What's your question?
Backing off of what was later, what addiction did Ignatius of Loyola have?
Okay, so.
Good question.
Excellent question.
I covered this in my doctoral work.
Well,
It's
so you might end up getting a doctorate too. So what did you see as the addiction St. Ignatius suffered?
one of his compatriots said he was addicted to gambling. He was highly promiscuous. Maybe today we would say he had a sex addiction. He had a very violent personality, so maybe he was very reactive. So he was a mess. So he's a poster child for the third millennium in terms of his problems. So that's why his story gives great hope to people. And this prisoner that I worked with on our 40 Weeks book for prisoners found incredible hope in Ignatius's early life, that he who is serving a 25-year sentence for armed bank robbery, that maybe even he could be holy. So Ignatius's story inspires great hope in people.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
We have a caller coming in. Sandy?
Yes.
Where are you calling from?
Waco, Texas.
Waco, good for you. And what is your question?
I would like to know if they have a program for teenagers.
Aha. What do you have for teenagers?
We have a program coming out in January of 2019 that we have been working for 3 years on with a lady in Latin America and in the United States. It's going to be for young adults from people in junior, senior, and high school all the way up to their late 20s. It's called True Heart, A Way to Selflessness. We've been working a very, very long time on it. We're excited about it, and I'm looking forward to rolling that out in 2019.
Great. So Sandy, there's something to look forward to in just about 5 or 6 months.
That's right.
That's not long at all.
That's right.
Unless you're a teenager, it seems forever. But
Forever, right. For
at
us,
our age,
it's a day.
yeah, it really is. I have another question from our studio audience. Man, we got to sidle right on up there. Where are you from, first of all?
Well, I was raised in Orange County, but I live in San Francisco.
Great. And that's California for those
California,
who live elsewhere. So what is your question?
Can you define frequent confession? Is that weekly? Is it monthly?
That's a very good question.
Yeah, it is.
What I recommend to people, once they have learned a very good and holistic way to make a confession, I give them a methodology for keeping track of what's happening to them on a daily basis. And then I suggest they make a confession once a month, unless there is something that's serious that they need to confess.
Right.
But again, this goes back to reading Ignatius's autobiography, who tried to save himself through constant, frequent confession. So you have to find a way of listening with a kind of a wisdom heart to people. If they are confessing frequently for a neurotic reason, or if there is something that really needs to be confessed appropriately. So I recommend once a month, unless something serious comes up.
And I'm hearing from priests as I travel that after a period of the last 45 years or so where confession really declined, it fell into desuetude, around the world. Not many places where it was recommended, and some places you had to make an appointment.
Or it was twice a year during Advent and Easter season.
Right.
They would do a parish event.
Right. And then when you back it up that way, then just tell one sin. Well, wait.
That's
right. I need more than one sin when I go to confession.
Right.
And so it's something that...
it's not that I need more, it's I have more.
Well, I need to confess more. Yeah, I don't need more sins. I got plenty. But I got to confess my sins. And so that's not a good idea either, just to squeeze it into Advent and Lent. But, and I think too, one of the things that people missed out was the importance of going to confession as married people. Some
That's
people
right.
think that, well, I'm married, I don't have a lot of the old sins I had. No, maybe you don't, but ask your spouse.
Right.
And you may find that you have a few sins that you hadn't thought of before.
Right.
And then, of course, to the men, I
Right.
always say every
Right.
Advent, I want you men to come to confession, because all I'm hearing out there is your wife's version of what
Right.
you do wrong.
Exactly.
I want to hear your side of the story.
One of the things I'm very excited about with our 40 Weeks program and our Whole Life Confession program, which is a short, it can be done by a parish in Advent or Lent. It's a different version of the Whole Life Confession from 40 Weeks, is that we're giving people a tool to look at their whole life.
Yes.
And they're starting to see when they're doing the things they're doing and how it's connected to a bigger narrative. That's where the sacred story comes in.
Yes.
And when people make this whole life confession, they feel like they've kind of made confession for the first time, because they're not just reading off of a list. They're seeing how their life needs to be redeemed by Jesus. And it's a very powerful experience for them. And I have them write a letter to Jesus with the structure after they've been spending 14 weeks looking at their life history. Mm-hmm. And they read this letter to Jesus in confession with the priest there. It's a powerful experience for the penitent, and the priests are very, very deeply consoled by this. And I think it encourages them of the value of this way of doing confession and teaching people how to do this in a way that's very deep and very intentional.
Because something that St. Ignatius does recommend is called the general confession.
That's right.
But it's not just a long list.
Right.
Again, it's that, I tell people, well, I already confessed that. I said,
Right.
Yeah, but why would I confess it again?
And this is what I'm trying to accomplish, and I think we have accomplished with the Whole Life Confession in both the 40 Weeks and in the separate program called the Whole Life Confession. It is a form of general confession, and it's letting people kind of bring their whole life to confession for the first time. And it gives them a method for going to confession in the future that's been very, very fruitful for people.
Yeah, exactly. And that's
and
what
hope-filled, which is what Ignatius was able to do with the laity and the early Jesuit apostolate that he inspired.
Yeah, when people ask, I've been getting a lot of questions, but probably looking at your material, that's where this is coming from.
That's good.
But people are asking, well, a priest was telling me about making a general confession, but I already confessed this stuff. And I try to emphasize the point of the general confession is that as we mature, that you ought to get better perspective. It's not just getting it out there, but gaining perspective on your life in the light of Jesus Christ and his redemption.
And many people who never take the time to slow down and to look interiorly, they don't have access to what's happening on the inside. And this process, which leads people in silence with a certain number of disciplines per day for a few minutes, starts opening them up to things that they've never seen or known before. And it becomes a very powerful tool then. Confession becomes very meaningful, very beneficial, and very spiritually productive for them.
I will always remember a line by Carl Gustav Jung. I believe it's in his autobiography. But he said that fewer than 2% of his clients were practicing Catholics, because the practicing Catholics went to confession and they took care of these problems there, whereas his clients were paying him a lot of money to go through therapy for stuff that people just came to church and dealt with and found that integrity. That's one of the key things of what we're talking about here. It's not just confessing, because as you and I know, we don't remember what people tell us. We don't try to. That's not our goal. It's rather their integration of the dark sides of their life and the lights that God gives them, that integration of their whole life and the areas that they don't want to bring up but need will work like a hidden cancer if they don't integrate.
That phrase in the scripture that says, perfect love casts out fear.
Yes.
If someone has a lot of fear in their life, then you know that they haven't really delved very deeply into their heart. Ignatius, right after his conversion, there are 3 near-death experiences that he relates right after another. One of them would be his early conversion, where he thought he was going to die, and he thought he was saved, and then he became aware of all of his sin. The next one was 10 years later, where he almost died, and his feeling was, why did I wait so long to come to Christ? Mm-hmm. So there was no fear there. There was just kind of a sense of sadness.
Yes.
Then the third episode, shortly before his actual death, his feeling was he was so overcome with love of Jesus that if he focused on heaven, he wouldn't get his work done. Yeah. So you call it the purgative, the illuminative, and the unitive stages that he's actually detailing there.
Yes.
So the holier one becomes, the less fearful they become of God, the more humble they become, and the more compassionate towards other people.
Yeah, I was just spent Monday with a friend of mine who's dying. He's very, very close to the end. And I was just telling him, now look, because I've had a couple close calls myself, and I said, this is where we look at an adventure. This is the next adventure.
Right.
And, meeting Christ and coming to the other side of this life, that is a great adventure. We should look forward to meeting him. And that's something that's good for us all. I want to, again, let people know where they can find out more.
Excellent. Very good.
Sacred Story Institute. You can be found on the internet by going to sacredstory.net. Sacredstory.net. You can see what materials are available. Some of your media material is there, and people can look at that and learn more about it, and hopefully get started on this program yourself to begin that journey to the adventure of Christ before you get to the final adventure when we die.
We have this wonderful program for pre-K through 8th grade too, which teaches young children how to start listening spiritually so that they have the tools when they're going to need them when they get older.
Well, one of the things we need to do is give a blessing because we're out of time.
Excellent.
Almighty God bless you all and keep you and cause His face to shine upon you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We can bring guests like Father Watson and all the other guests and the other programs that we do only because the network is brought to you by you. So please keep us in between your gas bill, your electric bill, and your cable bill, because, especially in the summertime, because our bill collectors do not take vacation like you do. So please remember us. Thank you.